The campaigns have agreed to the following ground rules. Each candidate will have 3 minutes to introduce themselves and their aims. All questions must be directed at all 4 candidates, and each candidate will have 3 minutes to answer each question. At the end of the question period, or roughly 11:33, each candidate will have 3 minutes for closing remarks. The order of presentations and responses to questions will rotate. Bill Cobbs will be the first to make an opening statement. Abdul El Sayed will be the first to answer the first question posed. Sri Tenadar will be the first to answer the second question posed, etc. The timekeeper will raise a yellow signal to indicate when 30 seconds are left to answer a question. A red signal when the time has elapsed. I ask the candidates please to respect the 3-minute time limit for answers upon which we have agreed. All of the campaigns agreed that questions should be submitted in advance or at the forum in writing. One aim was to reduce disruption. At least one campaign is being followed by Republican Party operatives who are planning trouble. Roughly 24 questions were emailed to me in advance of this meeting. We have collected another 30 at the forum itself. I will not be able to ask all the questions. I'm trying to ask questions in which the most interest was indicated. If your question is not asked, I ask that you stick around after the meeting. I understand the candidates will be here for a little while, and ask the question to the candidates directly. I ask that you not applause or interrupt answers during the forum. The clock will not stop during applause. You should know the little forum is being live streamed. Would you now please welcome the candidates to this Washtenaw County Democratic Party forum.
Good morning. I want to thank you all for coming out this morning and giving us this opportunity to ask your questions, to hear what we have to say, to talk about what we have planned for the future of Michigan. I think we'll all agree this week has been an interesting week. I'm hoping that we can get this back on track and focus on taking Lansing back for ordinary citizens in the state of Michigan. Now, before I deliver my comments, I want to acknowledge my wife, who's in the audience today, because she's the person that makes this possible for me. And, I know that when I die, I'm going to heaven. And the reason I know that is because 37 years ago, God gave me an angel to watch over me, and that's my wife. So, having said that, let me tell you, as a child growing up in the city of Detroit, attending Detroit public schools, never, ever, ever in my wildest imagination did I ever dream that one day I'd be standing or sitting in front of a group like this, asking you to support my candidacy to become the next governor of this state. Yet, here we are. And I always say the thing that made that possible was living in a state where opportunity was available to everyone. So I'm going to ask a question right now. How many of you are first-generation college grads? If you are, raise your hand. How many of you come from keep your hands up, by the way. How many of you come from blue-collar backgrounds? Raise your hands. How many of you have served this country in uniform? If you have, raise your hands. Me too. The most important thing that our governor has got to do is make sure that we are driving public policy that is citizen-based. For the last few decades, everything that we've done in Lansing has been geared towards creating more money and more opportunity for big business, and that's never trickled down to citizens. One of the things that you're going to hear me say time and time again this morning is that nothing drives economic growth. Nothing drives economic growth like consumers. Until we return the ability for our citizens to actually be consumers and have income that exceeds their basic needs like housing and food and clothing, we will never have the kind of economic progress we say is important. So that's why I am running to become the next governor of the state of Michigan. Thank you very much.
Okay, hold your applause, please. Abdul El Sayed.
My father immigrated to this country from Alexandria, Egypt, and he took a bet on a society that was the kind of place that was true to its ideals. And I got to learn about those ideals when I graduated from my public high school. I had this civics teacher, and she had this ability to construct a lesson in your mind. It was as if you were sitting there while the framers of our Constitution made the decision that we would be the kind of society that put ideals ahead of identities. And among those ideals is that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all people are created equal. And the reality is, as we look around us today, the level of inequity has never been higher. You have a differential in earnings that is over 200 times what a CEO makes relative to the workers who work day in and day out, making the products that those people sell for profit. And I asked myself as a child what my responsibility was to that set of issues. And the work that I have done has always been about trying to root out those inequities as they imprinted themselves on the bodies of people in health. I had the opportunity to rebuild Detroit's health department after it had been shut down when our city went through bankruptcy and emergency management. And in that time, I got to meet a little boy, fourth child of a 21-year-old mom, met his father probably 4 times in his life because his dad's in jail. And you ask yourself about the kinds of opportunities that that boy has in front of him. Hell, his probability of having died before the age of 1 is higher in Detroit than it was in my father's native Egypt. Probability of being hospitalized for lead, triple the state average, and being exposed to, hospitalized for asthma, triple the state average, and being exposed to lead, quadruple the state average. And we ask ourselves what our responsibility is to him. We built programs to give children like him access to a free pair of glasses so they could sit in their classrooms and actually see the board. We stood up to the polluters who are making them breathe the kind of air that none of us would be willing to breathe in a community like this by forcing some of those corporate polluters to reduce emissions and spend their own money to do it. And then we heard about Flint and realized that given the state of Detroit schools, that it was possible that our kids could be exposed to that same lead we were hearing about Flint in the very place we systematically concentrate them most of the day, most of the year. We had every school, daycare, and Head Start tested for lead in the water. And in that moment, came to appreciate that the way state government works has always put the interests of those with money, those who run the show, whether through their corporations or by buying out government, it has always put them first. And the question we have to ask ourselves today is, what is the set of ideals and the set of ideas that is ultimately going to be able to deliver the kind of government that boys like that kid finally and fundamentally deserve? That is what this should be about, and nothing else. And I know in rooms like this across this state that people are coming together because they believe in that politics. Now let's go get that together.
Thank you. Please hold it.
Good morning, how are you? I'm so excited to be here. My name is Shri Tanidar, and I'm excited to run for governor of Michigan. I am from Ann Arbor, so I have a little bit of a home field advantage, but I shouldn't take that too much because these are all professionals. These are wonderful people, great Democrats, and I'm so excited to be, have them with me here on this podium. I am an immigrant. There's a rumor that I came to America with $20 in my pocket. Not true. By the time I landed in New York, I had about $16 that I had a couple beers on the plane. Tomorrow, make sure you watch Super Bowl, and at about 8:30 p.m., you will see my ad. It's a brand new advertisement. I paid a little bit of money for it, so please watch. So I'm a scientist. I'm a scientist of people that understand things like climate change, and it's good for our leaders to understand climate change and why we must keep our Great Lakes clean and pure, right? And why we must shut down that time bomb, Enbridge Line 5, immediately. And as a scientist governor, I will make sure that Flint, Michigan never ever happens again. in Michigan. So I came to, I got my PhD in Ohio, and I got a job at the University of Michigan as a scientist in 1982. 1982. And I was so excited. I had a car that I had bought for $200. I put all of my worldly possessions in the trunk of that car, and I still have this much room left over. The question was, will the car make it to Ann Arbor, Michigan? I did. I came to the campus, central campus, parked my car. When I came back to my car, I got a ticket that wiped out half of my net worth. I'm a progressive Democrat. I'm the only one that voted for Bernie. I took my vacation in Iowa in January of 2016. My wife loves me. And I followed Bernie everywhere. And I stood behind the benches. And the security came to me after 4 of those meetings, and he said, "Sir, are you part of this campaign?" I almost got in trouble. Anyway, I look forward to a great discussion.
Thank you. Gretchen Whitmer.
Well, thank you. I am thrilled to be here with all of you today. Many of you know me from the fights that we waged together during the time that I was on the front line in the legislature for 14 years, often being the leader of the resistance and fighting back on attacks on working families, attack on our kids' education, attacks on women's health care, and the litany. And you know that I was one of the most progressive legislators while I was there. I always rivaled Rebecca Warren, so we can have that debate about Washtenaw versus Ingham County. But I'll tell you this, for those of you who don't know me, what I want you to know about me today is that I love the state of Michigan. This race is bigger than any one of us sitting up here. It's about the future of our state. I look around at the Michigan that my daughters are growing up in, and it doesn't resemble the Michigan that I think of when I tell you how much I love this place. There was a point in time where people packed up their families and moved to Michigan because you could get a great job, make enough money that you could raise your family up, actually buy the car that you were making, and retire with dignity in this state. There was a time when, no matter what community you lived in, you knew that your child was going to get the best public education on the planet. And there was a time when our goods and our people were safe moving the freeways and the highways, and you knew they were going to get to where they needed to be. I look around at my kids' Michigan, your kids, your grandkids' Michigan, and I see a state that the DeVos agenda has crippled our public education system, where we rank in the bottom 10 in literacy. I see a state that is literally falling apart, chunks of 696 smashing through windshields because our leaders manage our expectations instead of fight for our aspirations. I see a state with a city full of families that still cannot, with confidence, bathe their children, much less give them a glass of water at the dinner table. Now, I'm not a stranger to tough fights, whether it was as a prosecutor or the Senate Democratic leader in a sea of Republicans. I never went out of my way looking for a fight, but I never backed down from a tough one either. We've got a battle on our hands, and this is about the future of Michigan. For my kids, for you kids, for the young people here who are worrying about the debt that they've accumulated just trying to get the degrees that they need, this is about making sure that our education system is meeting the needs of our kids, that we are putting Michiganders back to work in high-wage jobs, rebuilding the state of Michigan, and that the Great Lakes state has clean, affordable, fresh water for every person who calls it home. I love this state. I'm so grateful for your showing up here this morning, and I'm excited about the debate we're going to have here today and moving forward the agenda we're going to start setting together in this state. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next question, first question on the list, will be answered first by Abdul El-Sayed, and then down the road to Gretchen Whitmer, and last answer from Bill Cobbs. The question is, what policies would you pursue to help existing Michigan businesses increase their competitiveness? How would you promote the attractiveness of Michigan to new businesses in areas other than Michigan's traditional strengths, autos, manufacturing, and agriculture?
Thank you for the question. I think everybody here recognizes that the vision for Michigan that has pushed people like Rick Snyder into the kinds of policies that he has pushed have ultimately undermined the concept that we don't have to be the kind of state that's always getting handouts from elsewhere by pushing profits to corporations. In this state, we're really between two different visions. The one is where we continue to underwrite and subsidize big corporations to choose coming to Michigan instead of coming to Wisconsin. They come here and then they proceed to offshore or automate the jobs that they promised. We're left without the revenue because we're subsidizing those corporations, and that we don't have the means of being able to invest in our people through education or our places through infrastructure. And so without investments in real people, without investments in the places that empower them to move themselves, their ideas, and their belongings around, that we're left without the means of real economic growth. Now, there's a question a lot of folks have been asking. Why didn't Amazon choose to come to Detroit? I think we're asking the wrong question. The question we should be asking is, why are we not the place here in Michigan that is building the Amazons of the future to begin with? And so the vision that I believe in for Michigan is a place where we don't give out $1 billion every year to large corporations who don't need it, who then move their jobs overseas or proceed to replace those jobs with machines. Instead, we're the kind of place that's invested in people, that is invested in infrastructure, and is the kind of place that is growing the businesses of the future to begin with. Now, anybody who talks about an economy and fails to mention the word automation has missed the point. 87% of the jobs that have been lost in this state have been lost because there is a machine that now does that job. The question becomes, who is going to build an economy forward that is more resistant to automation and that empowers people to have access to the basic goods and services that they should have in the richest, most powerful country in the world? So when we think about the future of our industry, we have to be honest about the kinds of industries that are less likely to be automated out. We have to be investing in human care, whether that's child care or elderly care or education or healthcare. We have to be invested in development and construction. Those kinds of jobs are really hard to turn into a robot. We have to be invested in research and technology. We have to be invested in artisan, craft, high-skill manufacturing. Those are the directions as a state that we need to go. Those are the kinds of jobs that are less likely to be turned into a machine over the long term. And then finally, the question becomes, are we willing to recognize that ultimately we will be the kind of place that grows if and when we take our people seriously? You talk to any CEO anywhere, and they'll tell you that the thing that they're looking for more than anything else is a really high-quality workforce, people who have been invested in with a great education and great infrastructure. Without those things, we are doomed to continue to ask big corporations to come here, to sell everything but the barn in terms of doing that, and to find ourselves no further down a vision of a kind of Michigan, which is the kind of place we want to hand off to our kids.
Shri Tender.
Thank you. I'll quickly answer this, is move the focus away from big corporate welfare, and I will invest in small businesses. I will create a culture of entrepreneurship, and I will invest $1 billion in creating skill sets, career technical education in middle school, high school, to have a skilled workforce so businesses can work with. And I want to give college students an incentive to start businesses in Michigan and create jobs. And if they do that, their college debt will be forgiven as much as the jobs that they create. So that I'm the only person here that has created jobs. I've created hundreds of jobs here in America, not a single job outsourced. Very quickly, I don't have a lot of time, I bought a small business for $75,000 loan I got. A 3-person chemical service business that solved problems, fought big corporations about pollutions and leaving chemicals in the ground. I grew that company. Immediately after I bought that company, the owner and the secretary retired. So I only had one chemist. And I grew that business to 1996 to about $2 million in revenues. In 2008, revenues were $65 million. I had 450 jobs created in a chemical service sector, largely doing R&D, Q&A, quality assurance, that type of work. And in the big recession, my business suffered. And the Bank of America, which got federal subsidiaries, had no trouble closing some of my businesses, selling some of it. And in 2010, I lost most of what I had built all those years. My wife and I put all of our assets in a budget rental truck. We drove from St. Louis, Missouri to Ann Arbor, Michigan. I came to Ann Arbor at 3 a.m. in September of 2010. I bought a little rental space, restarted my business, created 50 good paying jobs last year here in Ann Arbor. Now MEDC said my business model doesn't fit into their plans, so I got nothing from them. Same with Spark. So I did it all without the government help. I will give a helping hand to businesses. In 2016, I won the Entrepreneur of the Year award, and then I sold my business, took $1.5 million, gave it to all of my 50 employees. I gave it based on their length of service, not on their position. I put $6 million of that money into my campaign so I don't have to take a single penny from corporate special interest. And I'm running this. So I will be a jobs governor, and I will create and help small businesses.
Thank you. Question, Whitmer.
Well, thank you. So I jumped in this campaign over a year ago, and I think a lot of people wondered if that was too early or too close to the last election, but I know me. I need to throw my energy into something constructive. I believe that the future of this state depends on us getting our house in order. That's what I hear from individuals from Gogibbet County to Grosse Seal, but business people as well. We held a real State of the State last week, right before the governor did his State of the State. And one of the people that participated is a small business owner in the Lansing area, a woman who owns a paving company, who, you know, there's obviously a lot of work to do. She's looking for talent. She's looking for people with the skills to do the job. And that's what her biggest need is as a small business owner. It coincides with what I'm hearing from people across our state. We need real paths to skills that lead to high wage jobs. We hear Bill Schuette saying he's the jobs governor. We don't need more jobs. We need good paying jobs. We need the skills to get into those good paying jobs. When Amazon chose not to come here, it's a mandate for us to get our house in order to make sure that our education system is meeting the needs of our kids, that we're supporting people who dedicate their lives to teaching, people in the schools, that we ensure that we've got the infrastructure to support a booming economy. But most importantly, it's about making sure that our people have the skills. The greatest thing about this state, it's the people who call it home. But they've been forgotten by too many leaders who try to manage expectations instead of solving problems and making this state a place where Michiganders can get ahead. We have phenomenal manufacturing capacity. We should be building all 8,000 parts of a wind turbine right here in Michigan. We need to assess our assets, mobility, water. You know, we've got 21% of the world's fresh water, and we are laggards on water policy. That's why I say it's time to create a Department of the Great Lakes and Fresh Water here in Michigan, and create a blue economy where we have the most cutting-edge scientists here, developing policy, putting together businesses that create real water management based on science, pulling Line 5 out of the Straits of Mackinac, shutting down Nestle's continuous withdrawal without paying for it, and ensuring every Michigander has access to affordable, clean water. These are the things that I think we can do, we must do, and we will do after we win this election.
Thank you very much. Bill Cobbs.
We have the MEDC here in Michigan, and that's supposed to be about economic development. Unfortunately, almost 100% of the resources that go into MEDC today go to big business. They don't go to small and mid-sized businesses. They don't go to really creating the opportunity for Michigan to be a business incubator. So we got to fix that. The other thing that we should have learned over the last few weeks, when you look at what Amazon said about our state, when you look at the report that came out 10 days ago that talked about the deficiency in funding for education in Michigan, we clearly have real, meaningful work to do. You know, as the next governor of the state, I've said that one of the policies that is going to be paramount for me is making sure that we change the way that we fund public pre-K through 12 education in the state. We cannot continue this nonsense of underfunding and under-resourcing our schools and expect that we will be a player on the world stage. We have to prepare our kids to go out into a world where there is life beyond Michigan. There are other opportunities, that we're forced to operate in a global economy. And in order to compete, we've got to be giving our children the skills they need to do that effectively. So, as the next governor, I've said that we're going to change the funding formula. I've put together ballot proposals that we're ready to launch right now, so that should nothing else change in Lansing, we will have the citizens' mandate to get what we need to get done. The other thing that we really got to understand is that when we talk about job creation, one of the things that I probably know better than anybody else sitting on this panel, having worked in a Fortune 500 company and sat in the boardroom, having been a CEO and president, is that companies don't make decisions based on tax incentives. They don't make decisions based upon how much you're going to give them in terms of abatements. They make decisions based upon the overall environment that they're going to have to operate their business. And frankly, we've neglected our environment. We've neglected our infrastructure. We've neglected educating our kids. So the next governor of the state has got to be focused on making sure that we're deploying public policy that is reflective of what our citizens need to be participants in an economy that is greatly changed. We're never going to bring back the manufacturing world that we knew growing up. But we have an opportunity, a huge opportunity, to become a major player, not just in this country, but in the world, because we are unique in that we're surrounded by 21% of the entire world's fresh water supply. This is where people are going to want to be if we do the right things. And anybody who knows me knows that I've showed up at every single water issue event in this state, because I know that you got to do more than talk the talk, you got to walk the walk.
Thank you very much. Next question will be answered first by Sri Tedadar. Actually, it's a series of questions. Do you believe that Michigan needs to change the way it funds K-12 education? If you believe that changes need to be made in the funding system created in 1994 by Proposal A, precisely what would these changes be? If you propose to increase funding, from where would the additional money come? What roles do you see charter and private schools playing in Michigan's K-12 education system?
Good question. I think it all starts with education. I will close down and outlaw for-profit charter schools in Michigan. No one, including Betsy DeVos, should be profiting from our public school dollars. Education was the ladder for my success. I grew up in poverty. I worked as a janitor in my high school and college to support my family. And education was what helped me. Got a bachelor's, master's, and a PhD in chemistry. And that ladder is broken for too many Michiganders. Our education system is, what, 40th in the nation. We got to bring it in the top 10. I met many teachers all across Michigan as I travel. I met a couple ladies, teachers, Judy and Rachel, and they had tears in their eyes as they were describing me about the humiliation that they suffer. And Judy's salary hasn't changed for the last 10 years, and yet I saw her taking money out of her own pocket to buy supplies for her class. And this is no way to run education. We got to put more money into education. We spend $40,000 on prisoners, and we spend, what, $9,500 per student, and that's no way to do things. So I'll put much more money into education. I will bring a career technical education into middle schools and high schools, so our kids don't have to go to college if they don't want to. They can be able to acquire trade skills and live a good quality life. That's what I want to do. I want to invest. I want to make it easy for college students I want to take $120,000 or less, family income, should be able to send their kids to college cost-free. And then if you graduate and if you stay in Michigan and take up a job, your college debt will be forgiven over time. And if you create jobs in Michigan, it will be forgiven even faster. But we got to put money back. Snyder took away so much money from higher education. We got to put money back into, we got to invest in Michigan for us to be where we need to go. To achieve our dreams, our goals for Michigan, it all starts with education. And I want to be known as the education governor Michigan never had. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Whitmer.
Thank you. Well, this is a subject that is actually my favorite subject to talk about, education. I've got kids in the public school in East Lansing. I'm a proud product of our public schools. But more than that, I was raised by a woman who taught in the Lansing public schools, a grandma who taught in Waterford schools, and a grandfather who was the superintendent of Pontiac schools. And I know that a public education, a strong public education in every community is what truly levels the playing field. We have lost our way in Michigan. I am proud that I took on tough fights with governors of both parties when they wanted to pull money out of the school aid fund to shore up holes in the general fund. I am proud that I took on Governor Snyder when he introduced his first budget. I made the case that a budget is a statement of values. It's not just a balance sheet. I know he's a nerd and an accountant, but your budget is not just a balance sheet. It is a statement of who we are. His first budget gave away a massive business tax break, and he paid for it by trying to eliminate the earned income tax credit. He started taxing pensions in Michigan, and he cut our kids' schools to pay for a business tax break. We need a governor with a backbone of titanium, who is not beholden to the DeVos family, who will use the power of the governor's office to stop the continuous raid on the school aid fund. If we had a governor who was strong, we could infuse $750 million today into our kids' public schools. That's the kind of governor I'm going to be, because our kids' education has got to be the foundation of how we talk about moving our economy forward in a way that moves our families forward along with it. I have to tell you that I drafted the Michigan 2020 plan when I was in the legislature. I did it with my colleagues from the Senate. It was a free college plan, and we paid for it by eliminating tax breaks for corporations in Michigan. That's the kind of priorities that I'm going to bring into the governor's office. That's the kind of fight that it's going to take to make education system a top priority. But it's also always got to be with an eye on how do we treat the people who dedicate their lives to educating our kids with respect and giving them the support that they need as professionals. There are conversations I've had all across the state that stay with me. Every day there's someone or something that reminds me why I'm putting in 15-hour days, almost 2 years of a campaign. But it was a teacher in Alpena who was telling me as a first-year teacher, she was paid so little that she qualified for the bridge card. We got a teacher on food stamps in Michigan. That's got to be a part of our solution to how we fix the education system here.
Thank you. Bill Cobbs.
I'm the son. My great-grandparents were slaves. My grandfather was a sharecropper. My father worked in a factory his entire life. So one of the things that I know absolutely is that education is the only gateway in this country for any kind of social and economic mobility. So I've said as the next governor of this state, I am going to get past Proposal A. We've lived with this long enough and we know it's not working, so we got to change the formula that we're using to fund our schools. For the last 6 months, I've had folks working on a ballot proposal that we can have on the ballot in the fall of 2018 that will give us the tools that we need to change that formula and create more equalized educational revenue throughout this state. It's foolish for us to believe that we can have school districts that have 20 pupils in a classroom and school districts that have 40 pupils in a classroom and see the same educational outcomes. That's not possible. So we got to be willing to resource our education so that we get the kind of educational outcomes that we say we want. I've also said as the next governor of this state, I'm going to return vocational education to every single high school in this state, because not every kid can or does want to go to college. but we got to give them a pathway to a decent life. And we're not doing it now. Every single year, we have thousands of jobs in this state that go unfilled simply because our young people don't have the skills to do them. We can fix that. Now, here's the thing that we got to understand. We have said we can't fund education appropriately because we don't have the resources. So we got a way to fix that. I've said as the next governor of this state, one of the things that I want to do is move for a constitutional amendment that will allow us to move from a fixed tax rate of 4.25% to a progressive state income tax, so that people that are reaping the huge benefits of a policy stance that puts money in billionaires and millionaires' pockets pay their fair share. Now, on that progressive income tax, we'd have a top rate of 10%. Now, before you panic, the only people that would be paying that top rate are households that had an income of greater than $600,000 a year. Now, if you got that problem, I want you to line up in the back of the room so the rest of us can come get a loan when this is over. We can do better. And if we focus on making sure that we're resourcing public education the right way, we'll do better. Now, let's talk about charter schools for 1 second. My position on charter schools is real simple. I don't care if they exist. I'm totally neutral on it. But the one thing I've said consistently is that we will not use public tax dollars to fund private, for-profit charter schools. We can't outlaw them, but we can make sure that they function the same way parochial schools do in this state. That's the way we should be treated. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Abdul Syed.
So I want you to imagine something. You're walking into a first grade classroom, it's 11 o'clock, just before lunchtime. The first thing that you feel is that chill on your body because it's all windows and the boilers in the buildings don't work. First thing that you see is first graders wearing their coats. It's 11 a.m. They've been wearing their coats all morning. And you look around the room because you're there to inspect the classroom, this place where people put their most vulnerable people most of the day, most of the year. And in the corner of the room, you see a mouse. And it's not alive, it's dead, and it's been dead for days. That is the state of the classroom in Detroit schools today. This is the context for what we have to do to fix education. Now, our state spends less per pupil per year than any other state in the Midwest, and I'm not trying to be Mississippi. So we have to invest in our schools. How do we do it? Well, I told you we give $1 billion to corporations every single year. You take half of that, invest in our schools, and you've done your part. Not only that, we do things that are obvious, like legalizing marijuana, which the illegality of marijuana is what tends to drive people into jails rather than to schools in the first place. You take half of that money and you invest in the schools too. Beyond that, we have to make sure that the way we invest is equitable, not just equal. $718 less we spend per pupil per year in a school district like Detroit than a school district like Bloomfield Hills. We have to close that gap, and not only that, make up for it. We can't pay for infrastructure in a lot of community schools because the millage difference is 6 to 1. $600 per year versus $100 per year. That means that school districts can't actually take care of the buildings that they are operating in. So we have an idea of creating a school infrastructure bank where we would buy off the schools that districts don't use and then invest that capital in the schools that they do use. And then we have to have a conversation about charter schools. Nobody here pays taxes so that you are lining the pockets of some rich corporation. So we have to eliminate the profit motive in public schools. We also have to change the way that we authorize charter schools. Too often you have authorizers in communities that have no context for what's happening in the communities in which they're opening schools. You have to make sure that you have one authorizer statewide and that you have local authority on every single charter school board. Let's talk about beyond K through 12. We don't invest in pre-K. Every single child should have access to the education that they need when their brains are the most fertile. We need universal pre-K, and we can fund that through a tax credit. And then lastly, let's talk about higher ed. It's way too expensive for way too many people. We believe in a system where every student gets, if they come from a home making less than $150K a year, that they're making, at the end of the day, they get college for free. And that the opportunities that are available are not just four-year public college opportunities, but also 1- and 2-year programs that take the best of in-class learning through our community colleges and the best of on-the-job training through our great unions, and create the kind of certifiable programs that train somebody into a job that they can have for the rest of their lives.
Thank you. Sri Tendra.
We didn't start that.
Have you?
I can have two scoops.
Okay, all right. Thanks. Sorry, my mistake. Then Gretchen Whitmer. Next question. Since 2013, the ability of Michigan unions to protect workers has been dramatically cut by the state legislature and Governor Snyder. For example, unions representing teachers are explicitly prohibited from bargaining about layoff and recall rights and a range of other issues. The viability of public and private sector unions has been undercut by the prohibition on requiring union dues of all employees in a bargaining unit. Do you support restoring union rights and powers cut over the past 4 years? And if so, how would you accomplish this result?
Absolutely, first and foremost. I want to be very clear about that. You know, we have seen so many attacks on working people in this state. When the Republican establishment decided to literally lock the public out of the Capitol, I didn't just stand outside with the nurses and the firefighters and the teachers and the auto workers who showed up, who wanted to have their voices heard. I threw open the doors of the Capitol and we led the resistance from my office. But we watched them cut the public out of the conversation, mounted police around the Capitol to intimidate people from showing up and protesting at our state capitol. We've seen continuous attacks, whether it is this prevailing wage, now the attack that is being, you know, the signatures are being scrutinized, or it is the attack on eliminating unemployment, taking it from 26 weeks to 20 weeks. I'm proud to have been on the front line. I'm proud to have been a union member. But we've got a lot of work to do in this state. Now, no one can tell you that they can single-handedly undo right to work. If they tell you that, they don't understand how it's going to happen. But as governor, I can tell you I will use every ounce of power that comes with that governor's office, the executive branch of government, to create a Department of Labor, to create a department that oversees safety in the workplace, that we will run an agenda that will restore the right to collectively bargain, because that is what created the middle class in this country. That's why the work of, I see someone with Voters Not Politicians button over here, that's why the work of what they did in collecting signatures to change redistricting in Michigan is so crucial to us enshrining this right in our Constitution. We need a legislature to get that bill to my desk so I can sign the repeal of right to work. And finally, I want to say, let's stop using their language. Let's call it what it is: corporate servitude. We have to empower people in our state to raise their voices and to bargain the terms of their employment. We have all benefited from unions in this state, every one of us. And I think it's important we've got a governor who understands that and who is going to fight to restore those rights. And I'm absolutely dedicated to that.
Thank you. Bill Cox.
Organized labor really is what created the working middle class in this country. You know, I grew up at a time when if somebody worked in one of the plants, they could afford to have 2 cars. They could afford to pay for their home. Some of those folks were lucky enough to have a summer home and have a boat up north. We have created a wholesale attack on labor in this state. And as the next governor of this state, I've said that the day I take office, I start working with the state attorney general to do everything we can to repeal right to work in Michigan. It's nothing more than an organized assault on the labor movement. And one of the things that I understand very clearly is that when you disadvantage people educationally and you create economic hardship for them, they're so busy focusing on how they're going to survive that they don't know how to fight for anything else. And that's what we've got to focus on making sure that we don't do for our citizens going forward. Clearly, we have a situation where people have been fed the rhetoric that labor creates a reason for businesses not to want to be here. That's not true. You know, one thing I can tell you from my own experience is that as a leader in corporate America, I care about making sure that the people who work for me are able to live a decent life. You know, I'm probably, with the exception of Gresham, the only person sitting up here who's ever been a member of a labor union. I was a member of the UAW because I worked on a factory floor. I was a member of the Police Officers Association of Michigan because I was a police officer. I was a member of the DPOA, Detroit Police Officers Association, because I was a police officer. So I know what it means to be a member of a labor union, and I know what labor unions accomplish for not just the people who are part of them, but for the community at large. Because when they're putting money into people's pockets, that money flows back into our communities. That's why we're going to do better.
Thank you very much. I'll say it.
So how's everybody enjoying your weekend? You have that because of the labor movement. So look, I know the circumstances from a very different perspective. I remember working in an emergency room one Saturday like this up in New York, and a young man had come in with a very gruesome injury and took his history, came to appreciate that it was his first day on the job in a setting where he hadn't been appropriately trained on how to operate heavy machinery. And that man walked away from that emergency room, thankfully with his life, but without a digit. When we talk about things like prevailing wage, it's easy to focus on the wage part, but it's also about worker safety. It's also about creating the kinds of environments where people know that they have the right training because we're paying appropriately for the labor that's being offered. Throughout our history, we have always empowered people who come together around movements to demand something better. That is what labor is about, and fundamentally that's what we're doing here today. We're exercising that ability to organize. So when we think about how it is that we can stand with labor, obviously everybody here will tell you that you have to repeal right to work, that you have to protect prevailing wage, that you have to empower a civil service commission that actually cares about the civil service. All of those things are obvious. Now the question becomes, how do you do it? To me, I think of 3 L's, right? You need to lead, you need to legislate, and you need to litigate. And I think all 3 of those things have to be done in tandem. Now what do I mean by leadership? It's the ability to drive the story in communities where there have been issues supporting folks for a really long time. And I'll tell you, from my experience, I ran animal control. It's part of the health commissioner job they don't tell you about. Is that you walk in and all of a sudden you've got to be the dog catcher. So folks are like, well, you couldn't even be elected for dog catcher. It's like, actually, I already did that job. And in that role, we had some of the worst outcomes in the entire country, right? Only 14% of the dogs that came in would leave. And so we needed new leadership, we needed new facilities, we did that. But more importantly, I wanted to understand what it was about the working conditions that our folks were working in. And we found that the animal control officers in our facilities hadn't received a pay raise for over 10 years. They were making $12 an hour. And as you know, I believe in a $15 minimum wage. So we sat down and we negotiated with their Teamsters local. The first raise that they'd gotten, we took them 25% up to $16 an hour. Now, you know what happened? All of a sudden, the second and third jobs that they were working, they didn't have to work anymore. They felt happy and taken care of at work. And you know what they were able to do? They took that number from 14 to 71%, reducing dog bites 30%. I know from the experience of a leader that, in fact, if you empower unions, they deliver goods and services in a way that you never imagined. It's good for business. We just have to stop the corporate onslaught, the recognition that you can continue to take and take and take to extract that extra dollar and dollar and dollar. We have to stop that in this state, and I will lead, I will litigate, and I will legislate to get that done.
Thank you.
I ran small businesses for the last 26 years. You know, small jobs. I was always an employee number 1 when I started a new job. So I know how important employees are to the success of the business. I also know that they depend on the business in terms of taking care of their children's education or health care or paying their mortgage or buying a car. So I also believe that, as I ran a service business, and it's important that your employees are happy. If they're happy, then they are going to interact with the customers in a happy way, and that's going to be good for the business. So I always believe treating your employees fairly and well is important, and it's good business. And I will work hard to repeal right to work. I will protect prevailing wage, and I will raise minimum wage to $15 an hour and tie it to inflation so our families don't fall behind. So that's what I will do. I will be the most progressive governor. I will take the last 7 years, we have seen the Republicans have taken this too far to the right. And I will ensure that Michigan becomes a progressive state and an inclusive state and make sure the economy works for all of us. Now, you're going to hear very similar things from all four of us because we are all good people and we are all Democrats. and so how do you decide? And I think one of the most critical thing is leadership. What kind of a life that they have lived, what kind of experiences that they have had, how have they reacted when things didn't go their way? That's where you see a person's leadership. How have they fought when things have gone wrong? That's what matters. Now, we need to win this election. If we don't, then game is over. We not only need to win this election, but we need to win this election with at least 10 points so that hopefully we can carry the House. Once I have the House, I will have the leverage to fight with the Republicans and Republican Senate to get things done. You know, I've been a street fighter. I've been on streets all my life, and adversity is not new to me. And I'm willing to fight with them every day, every week, to make things happen. I will put together big ideas, big plans. I'll bring really grand plans, because I am not doing this because this looks good on my resume. I got a pretty good resume. So I'm there to make things happen. I'll fight with them. If they say no just for sake of saying no, I'll go campaign against them, and I will go to the people of Michigan if I don't get what I need to take this state to the progressive and inclusive.
Thank you very much. Question number 4, Bill Cobbs will start this one. What specific steps will you take to protect the environment of Michigan? In particular, what is your stance on fracking? And will you take on Enbridge and decommission Line 5, whose rupture would seriously threaten the well-being of the Great Lakes?
So in case you didn't know, I've been taking on Enbridge and Nestle for the last 2 years. You know, when there's been a meeting regarding Nestle or Enbridge, I've been there. I was in Big Rapids in April when Nestle, with the help of the DEQ, was fighting to get 200 gallons more per minute than they currently take. I've been very clear on this. Critical to Michigan's future is the deployment of a water and environmental policy that protects our most important resources for this generation and generations to come. Right now, we have 7,300 hazardous waste sites in this state that need to be addressed. And the fund that is currently in place to address those is about to run out of money. The next governor of this state has got to make refunding that fund and keeping us in front of that issue paramount. Because we all love the state we live in. We can't afford to see it become a wasteland. And that's fast where we're heading to if we don't take corrective action. So let me be clear. We will immediately change the leadership in DEQ, because I want somebody leading the Department of Environmental Quality that really cares about the environment. I don't need a lobbyist from BP heading up our Department of Environmental Quality. We need to make sure that we're investing in our water and other resources. You asked a question about fracking. What I've said I'm going to do as the next governor of this state is very clear. We will put a 5-year moratorium on fracking in Michigan, because until we absolutely understand the long-term impact that it has on our substrate, we can't afford to continue to issue fracking permit after fracking permit and hoping that nothing is going to go wrong. You know, I've said about Enbridge, it's like having a gun that you put 6 bullets in, and you put it up to your head, and you pull the trigger, and you say, nothing bad is going to happen. Enbridge is not a question of if, it's a question of when. And the fact that our governor last week said that he wasn't going to follow the recommendation of the review board is horrendous. In me, you will have a governor that is focused on keeping this state pristine so that our kids want to live here. Thank you.
A child who has even mild persistent asthma has a probability of missing 1 day every 2 weeks of school because they wake up and cannot breathe. I want you to think about what that means. So we talk about education, we talk about all of these other issues of opportunity. If you fundamentally wake up 1 day every 2 weeks and you can't breathe, it does not matter what else we're doing. And we recognized that set of problems in Detroit, a city where 3 times as many kids get hospitalized for asthma as the rest of the state. We knew we needed to do something. It didn't matter who it was we had to stand up to. Now, I've never run a business, but I'll tell you, I have stood up to them. When Marathon Petroleum, the biggest polluter in the most polluted zip code in the entire state of Michigan, yet again was going to get away with raising their emissions of sulfur dioxide in an area where the EPA has already said they're in what's called non-attainment, we organized with the local community and said enough is enough. The DEQ was going to grant the deal, and we stood up and said, no, you're not. We forced them to invest $10 million of their own money to reduce their emissions when they had wanted to increase them overall. And then when a company wanted to store unlimited piles of something called pet coke, which releases silica into the atmosphere, we knew it was another issue. And so I personally got up and testified against them. We were able to get the Board of Zoning Appeals to deny their permit request. And then when it had to do with kids drinking potentially leaded water in the schools, we went out and fought that fight, got every single school tested for lead in the water. I have led these fights. In fact, the Michigan League of Conservation Voters, in view of the work that we did, awarded me Public Official of the Year. But it's not even about that. It's about how we connect these issues to the kinds of maladies that people across the state have faced for far too long. So when it comes to standing up against these big corporations, I've done it before and won every single time. When it came to storing fracking waste in the city of Detroit, I personally negotiated a contract with that organization who was going to do it, forcing them to take their fracking waste elsewhere. You're not going to do it in our backyard. So when it comes down to a governor who believes in these issues, I've already fought these fights. But I'll say this, there's a lot more we need to do. Our DEQ is led by a person who has taken money from the oil industry most of her career. We need leadership that cares about these issues in the ways that people like you and me care about these issues. Not only that, I believe in taking the DEQ and the DNR and putting them together, giving them funding to the level of at least $10 million a year to be able to actually be the regulator they're supposed to be. And then when it comes to things like Line 5, I agree with Bill. We can't continue to play Russian roulette with 10% of our world's water between Lake Michigan and Lake Huron. I was one of the first candidates who said we have to shut it down immediately. And so it's about being able to have the leadership and knowing that people aren't going to be bought out. I am the only candidate in this race who's actually raising money. I don't have enough of my own. Raising money and not taking corporate money. But we've raised $2 million on the strength of people like you who believe in leadership like this. So let's get it done. Thank you.
Michigan is a beautiful state, and we must protect our natural resources. And who better can do that than a scientist? I have used my own hands to analyze contaminated soil that the corporations have left behind chemicals in. I've analyzed the air for toxic fumes. I've analyzed water. And so I bring a scientist mind to the governor's job. And as a scientist, I understand how the Enbridge Line 5 with its coating has worn off, and it's a ticking time bomb that could create a huge problem, a problem 1,000 times more so than Flint, Michigan. And Enbridge has violated the easement they have with state of Michigan, and our governor and our attorney general have the power to stop them. And as a governor, I will do that. I'm opposed to fracking. I'm opposed to any kind of chemicals left behind by corporations. I would hold corporations accountable. Let me tell you a story. The chemical testing lab that I owned and managed for all these years, one woman came to me and she was getting skin irritation working in her gardens. And there was a big, huge chemical company in that town, and they had these huge stacks, and there was ash flying all over. And this chemical company was the only employer in town, and when the people were afraid to go to them and complain, and when they did go to them and complain, they will not be heard. And what I did was I took that soil from this woman's backyard. I did a chemical analysis on that. And then I went and collected some of the fly ash that was coming out of these stacks and analyzed that fly ash. And I found that the carcinogenic chemicals that were in the fly ash were the same chemicals this woman's backyard had in her soil. And I wrote a report, and with my report, when the townspeople went to the corporations, they had no choice but to take action. So that's the kind of understanding that I would have as a scientist. I would solve problems, not ideology. I think the time has come now, just the speeches, however passionate, isn't going to get us there. We need a person who can take action, who can make things happen. You know, having run small businesses, having met payroll every 2 weeks, I'm a man of action. And I will come in and make things happen and keep our state beautiful that it is.
Thank you. Gretchen Whitmer.
Well, thank you. You know, any one of us who's lived in Michigan for even a small amount of time knows that we are defined by our water. It literally defines our borders, but it also defines our psyche. Some of my favorite memories growing up as a kid here in Michigan were swimming in the Thornapple River or fishing for perch off the dock on Lake Michigan. And, you know, I opened by talking about how we've been laggards on water policy because of the abundance. You know, I'm proud to have a strong environmental record that I've earned over the years. I'm proud to have worked with and learned from people like Lana Pollock and Liz Brader and Rebecca Warren and Chris Kolb, strong environmentalists who are passionate and who are always giving voice to the different environmental problems that we have across the state. Our poor water policy is exactly why we've got things like algae blooms here in Washtenaw County. It's why we've got Nestle pulling as much water out of the ground as they want without paying for it. It's why we've got a city in Flint, Michigan that still cannot, with confidence, use the water coming out of their taps. It's not limited to these areas. We've got problems across this state, from fire retardants that were in anti-fire chemicals that have been used in different parts of the state. From Oscoda to Kent County, we've got problems with Wolverine burying toxic chemicals that they use in the tanning of shoe products. We need experts in the cabinet who are really going to be fighting for the people of this state, who are going to be determining the policy that's driven and executing on that. I'm absolutely committed to creating this Department of Great Lakes and Freshwater to oversee and ensure every one of us has access to clean, affordable water, every person in this state, to shut down businesses that are exposing us to risk of this most precious resource that we are so lucky to be home to. And a cabinet that truly does represent the great diversity of this state. That is my commitment, because I know, had there been a mom or a person of color or someone from Flint sitting around the table when the decision was made to pinch pennies instead of treat water, we would have had a very different outcome. This is the kind of leadership I think we need now more than ever. Let's talk about Line 5 for just a minute. We are going to be up against Enbridge, who has got a lot of money and a million reasons, many millions of reasons, to keep that line in the water as long as they can. We have to have a real strategy. There is not a spigot in the governor's office. We need a governor with a legal plan to file the to enjoin the easement on day one, but a real strategy long-term to get that pipeline shut down. So don't let anyone fool you by saying on day one they can turn it off. But I've got a strategy to make sure that we are successful in getting that pipeline out of the Great Lakes, and we are going to see it through until there is no more risk to the Straits of Mackinac.
Thank you. This question will go first to Abdul El-Sayed. Will you fight to ensure access to reproductive health care, including abortion, contraception, and other services? If so, what exactly what steps will you take in this area?
When I walked into the health department in Detroit, I was walking into a city where 1 in 6 births were unwanted to a teen mom. One of the most important things we knew we could do around disrupting the challenges that people face in their lives and empowering people to have their best, most dignified life was empower folks to make a choice. As a medical student, I had the opportunity to sit with a young woman. She was exactly my age, and she was making the decision about whether or not she was going to undergo an abortion at a Planned Parenthood clinic. This was one of the most meaningful experiences of my life. And one of the things that I learned in that moment is that however hard that decision is, it is always an individual decision, and we have to empower women to make that decision for themselves. And we have to do it at every moment. That doesn't just mean empowering Planned Parenthood, it means that too, but it also means making sure that there's access to pre-conception family planning too. One of the frustrations that I have is that the enemies of choice, these people don't want anybody to have access to a choice ever. And so you're putting people in positions where they don't have the means of having access to basic contraception so they don't get pregnant in the first place. And so I not only believe in the responsibility to empower a woman's choice, I believe in the responsibility to empower a woman's choice across the continuum of when that choice happens. And I am the only person in this race on the left who has any concept of how to operationally do that. I ran a health department where that was a big part of our work, where we thought critically outside the box about how to meet people where they were so they could have access to the services that they need. This is the work of a governor. Make no mistake, yes, as a governor you lead legislation, sure, but you also lead a 50,000 person, $56 billion agency, set of agencies. And if you don't know how to operationally do the work of providing services day in and day out for people who need them, when they need them, where they need them, then it's really hard to walk in and say, yes, I know how to do this. So yes, all of us are going to tell you we agree that a woman should have a right to choose. The question becomes, who's done the work to actually empower that choice in the work that they've done in the past?
Thank you. Shri
As we have heard from others, I am a strong supporter. We have seen attacks on women's rights, not only here in Lansing, but we've seen attacks on women's rights in Washington, D.C., and the things that we hear there. And I'm a proud supporter of women's rights to choose. And I want to ensure that in terms of healthcare needs, in terms of birth control, there should be no restrictions. I call my mother my hero. There was a time when my family, when we were struggling, 6 sisters, 2 boys, and my mom and dad. And one day, there was nothing in the house for her to feed us. And she boiled a pot of water. And in the boiling water, she threw a couple spoons of salt and 2 fistfuls of rice powder. And she made a paste and fed us, all of us. So I'm the only candidate who knows what it is like to go to bed hungry. And I've seen this woman, this mother, who took care of her family. I learned a lot from her. I learned from my mother how to never give up. I learned from my mother how to stand for something that you care about. And one of the most important things I learned from my mother is being fearless. And that's the kind of leadership I will bring to Lansing. In 1996, my children were 4 and 8 years old, and their mother passed away. And I ran my business creating jobs while taking care of 2 boys as a single father, until I met a woman 3 years later. And I've seen my wife, my second wife, coming into our family, which was a broken family, and put it all together and make it a home again. You can see why these 2 women are my heroes, and you can see why I will ensure that women are respected and their rights are respected in our state of Michigan.
Thank you very much. Gretchen Whitmer.
I guess I would just want to start by saying I'm really proud to be up here with a group of people who have such compelling experiences and stories and share our values. I am as optimistic as ever that we are going to have a great 2018. So with regard to women's right to choose, I'll tell you that I've seen a lot of attacks, we've all seen them at the Capitol every single session, where legislator after legislator introduces bills to make it harder for women to access real options when it comes to our health care. One of those attacks came when I was the leader in the state Senate. The Republicans pushed through legislation to require that women and families pre-purchase abortion riders with their health insurance. I hear you laughing because you know how ridiculous that is to pre-plan for an unplanned event and to buy something that doesn't actually exist. But the most offensive part of what they were doing was that they literally didn't let a single woman or healthcare provider testify, that they made this applicable, even in cases of rape and incest. And they were shutting out our voices from even being a part of the debate. And it was during that debate that I decided it was important to put a face on the many women that they were shutting out and impacting. And I decided at the last minute to share my story of being assaulted as a freshman in college, to put a face on the women who they were ignoring. I told my story, and the vote happened, and it was a partisan vote. I didn't change a single vote that night. And I went home about as blue as I've ever felt. Bearing my soul, I had to call my dad on the way home and tell him, because I didn't want him to read about it in the paper, because this is a story that I hadn't even shared with him. But by the next morning, so many women and families had reached out across our state to share their stories. Hundreds of people called my office or sent Facebook messages or emailed. And it was then that I knew that doing that wasn't a futile exercise. I was adding my voice to a cause that is long overdue. We are in the midst of a massive culture change right now in this country, and we cannot take our foot off the gas for a second. I will continue to fight for every woman and family in this state to have full access to health care options. That's why when Governor Snyder embraced the Affordable Care Act, I rolled up my sleeves and I sat down with that Republican governor and negotiated the terms of Healthy Michigan. And we now have 680,000 Michiganders who have health care coverage because of it. I'm proud of that work. That's why I live my values and provide health care to everyone on my campaign staff. We have got to demand better from our leaders, and ensuring that every woman has access to reproductive health care on the front end and throughout her life is a critical priority of mine.
Thank you.
This will be perhaps the shortest answer that I will give this morning. The first line of the Michigan Constitution says that government and political power is initiated in the people, that government is for their equal benefit, security, and protection. I believe in what the first line of the Michigan Constitution says. So this is really a yes or no question, and the answer is absolutely yes. As far as I'm concerned, the only person that has an opinion about a woman's reproductive rights is that woman. It is not our job to interfere in that in any kind of way, and it is our job to make sure that we provide the right support to allow them to make the decision that they're comfortable with. That's my answer. Yes.
Thank you very much. Next question starts with Shri Tenador. According to the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, in 2016, there were 1,365 deaths in Michigan from opioid overdoses, not involving heroin, a 54% increase from the previous year. Do you believe that the state should do more to respond to this public health care crisis? And if so, what?
Absolutely. There is a lot that needs to be done. We first of all, we need to treat this as a health care issue, not a law issue. The answer to the crisis is not to lock up people. The answer is people need help people need counseling, people need support. And that's, we need to bring compassion. This issue needs to be handled, one, with compassion for the people who are suffering. And secondly, we need to take action against the pill mills, taking action against the doctors who overprescribe. We need to take actions against the pharmaceutical companies that push these drugs on the doctors, and then the doctors very unethically push these drugs on people. There's absolutely no, my neighbor's daughter, she went to get her tooth taken out, and she got oxycodone, 30 tablets with a refill prescription. You don't need that. No one needs that. Maybe I'm not no doctor, but maybe I would take a couple of ibuprofen. So we see a lot of abuse, and you know, don't think this is done because of money. The pharmaceutical companies want to make their money. The doctors want to make their money, right? And you know, who suffers is the people. And my overall theme of my campaign is putting people over corporate profit. Whether the corporations are coming and pushing drugs on us, or whether the corporations are coming and putting carcinogenic chemicals in our soil, we really need to be tough. In this state, corporations get away with all kinds of loopholes. Not only they don't pay their fair share of taxes, but they pollute our environment. Nestle steals our water, right? We got to either charge them 10 cents a gallon and use that money to clean up Great Lakes, or not let them take any of our water.
Thank you
So
very
I'll
much.
be tough on the corporations.
Question Whitmer.
Okay, well, thank you. I think first we gotta acknowledge the magnitude of the opioid crisis in our state. More people die of opiate abuse than from gunshots every year in this state. More people die from opiate abuse than car accidents in this state. It's time for us to have a real smart conversation about how we move forward here. Because addiction, my family is not a stranger to addiction, unlike probably a lot of families in this room and families across the state. And addiction is not a moral failing, it's a disease. And we have to get serious about treating it that way, not criminalizing a disease, not punishing a disease, but giving people the support they need to treat the disease. That starts with, I came up with a 6-step plan that is on my website that I've talked about it many times, and I'll just quickly go through it. But if you want to check it out, it's available online. But first and foremost, we need a governor who's ready to declare a state of emergency. Harness and marshal the resources available to get right into giving people the treatment that they need and the support that they need. We need, step 2, a real education plan across the state for families, but for doctors, for prescribers, for addicts, what you can do, what it means, and what taking one of those prescriptions might mean for you. I don't know that people have any appreciation for the risk of it. It means that we've got to ensure that insurance companies are covering abuse deterrent pain relievers. It means pharmaceutical drug monitoring, that we've got a state system that every doctor and pharmacist is checking before they're filling prescriptions. That we've got real treatment system and mental health. Those are the 6. When John Engler left office, he eviscerated the mental health system in this state. We've got to rebuild that so that we can get people the support that they need. But let's remember who we're all up against. Because after this primary, we've got to focus our energy on winning the general election in November. This is about the future of our state. Bill Schuette is the person who authored the drug immunity law, making Michigan the only state in the nation where if a pharmaceutical company or their product injures you, you have no legal recourse. Only if you're in Michigan. Guess what? If you're a Michigander who was hurt, even if you moved to Indiana, you still don't have legal recourse because it's for anyone from Michigan. We are treated like second-class citizens because of the work that Bill Schuette did. I authored the law to eliminate the drug immunity here in Michigan. We have got to make sure that we are not second-class citizens, and we've got to make sure that that guy is not our next governor.
Thank you.
The opioid crisis that we're seeing today is not something new. It has been something that's been around for decades. What's changed is that when I was a young cop 40 years ago, it was a street problem. Today, it is a big business pill mill problem. And that's where we have to begin to attack this. We have got to do a better job of monitoring the way physicians prescribe those drugs to their clients. We've got to question what happens when a patient shows up at a pharmacy with a script for 60 pills. That's just not right, folks. And we're not paying attention to who the real culprits are behind this. It is the physicians. 20 years ago, if you had done a survey in Michigan, you would have found maybe 50 pain management centers. Pain management centers in Michigan have become a huge business because that's where people go when they want drugs like Oxycontin and Dazzle and the drugs that are really decimating our society today. So as the next governor of this state, one of the things that I want to do is to make sure that we put more stringent regulations in place for how much a physician can prescribe, how often those prescriptions can be renewed, and really monitor the kind of prescriptions that they're sending into pharmacies so that we have an opportunity to stop the bad actors early, so before this becomes an ever-increasing issue in all of our communities. Because there used to be a time when opioid addiction was primarily an urban issue. It is a issue that crosses every demographic in our state today, and we got to fix it.
Thanks very much. I'll say it.
I just want to be very clear about something. This is not the first time we have had a massive drug epidemic in our society. The first time it happened, it was in urban communities and the drug was crack. And instead of having the kind of outpouring of empathy that I'm so glad we're seeing now, what we did is we launched a war on drugs. And that war on drugs has fundamentally torn apart the fabric of urban communities. And unless we are honest about that, we can't get this next one right. So now the question becomes, what do we do? My partner, Sarah, is a psychiatrist. And we spend a lot of time talking about this one issue. The nice thing about me is that it comes with a twofer. You get a smarter person who knows more about issues. And so I'm thankful that Sarah will be helping me think about this as somebody who's involved day to day in treating it. So let's talk about what we have to do. Number one, our mental health infrastructure was decimated. There was a nationwide push to take the locus of mental health services out of these big psychiatric hospitals and into communities. That was great. But when it came to Michigan, Governor Engler, instead of actually building the outpatient mental health infrastructure that we need so badly, passed a tax cut. Sound familiar? And that's where we are right now. So we have to build that infrastructure. Number two, we have to bring providers, everybody from doctors to therapists, into a room and say, how do we get this right? Because when I was in med school, we used to treat pain as what they called the most important thing that you come out of out of the patient's room. And at the end of the day, we know that's not true, and that's what drives this overprescription. A lot of doctors don't mean to do this, but we don't have guidelines in place. So how can we, as a doctor, convene the clinical community and think about what those guidelines look like? Number three, we know we can save lives, we just don't do it. Drugs like Narcan, access to needle exchange, those are things we have to invest in. And if you live in a rural community, you might have a first responder with Narcan who could save your life, but they're not coming for 15 minutes. By then, it's too late. How do we put that in the hands of the people who can save lives, the people who love that individual? How do we have a conversation about stigma and mental illness? The fact that we still, we can empathize with people in our lives, but we still think about the other person's loved one who is affected by drug use and say, well, that person's probably a bad person. How do we have that conversation, lead it honestly so we can build the infrastructure that we need? And then I'll say this. Look, a lot of people love to talk a good game about holding pharma and holding the insurance industries accountable. You know the way we do that? It's called Medicare for all or single payer. If we're honest about it, If we want to be honest about it, then what we do is, without apologizing, talk about the kind of healthcare system that sidelines these industries that have had their way for so long. And we're talking about it. And I also know that I'm not bought out. I'm not taking drug industry money. I'm not taking insurance industry money, because when I get there, I do want to be able to have an honest conversation with you, the people who voted me into there, to talk about what it is that we do to buy everybody in this state out of the evil decision that too many people have to make about being able to pay for their prescription drugs or get the care they need when they need it. That's the conversation we have. That's how we tackle this problem.
Thank you very much. We have time for one last question, and it's going to be a yes or no question. So after the primary, unfortunately, only one of you is going to win. Will each of you commit to supporting the primary winner in the sad eventuality that you might lose? With Gretchen Whitmer?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yes.
Thank you very much. Now we have the closing statements. We each get 3 minutes for this. And I believe Gretchen Whitmer is first.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming out on a Saturday, making this the start of your day and engaging in what I think was a great conversation here about the future of our state. I want to tell you why I chose the logo that I chose, all right? I have the Mackinac Bridge is on my logo. The first iteration of the logo, though, had the mitten, it had the bridge, it had a name, it had a circle, and someone pointed out, it looks a little bit like a beer logo. And I was okay with that, because I like beer, and we have a great craft brewing industry here in Michigan. But I decided to streamline it and just make it the Mighty Mac. And I did that because I love traveling the state of Michigan. I think this is an amazing place that we call home. I have been into every one of the 83 counties during my life here in Michigan. And as a candidate, I've been into 50 out of the 83 counties, and I'm getting into every one of them before this is through. Because every one is important. We've got to stay true to our values and always seek to solve problems in this state. I chose the Mighty Mac as my symbol because it was built 60 years ago. It was open to traffic 60 years ago, this past November. It was built at a time when there was a Democratic governor who had to deal with a Republican legislature. Let's hope that's not the case after this election. People said it couldn't be done. They questioned whether or not you could build a 5-mile suspension bridge over the streets of Mackinac. But Michigan leaders banded together. They used Michigan grit, Michigan brains, Michigan iron to build the Mighty Mac, and did what people said couldn't be done. It connected our people, and it moved our economy forward. I think right now, more than ever, there are too many politicians who want to talk about building walls. We need to get back to building bridges. Thank you.
The next governor of the state of Michigan has got to be somebody who brings 3 things to that job. Number 1, temperament. Number 2, integrity. Number 3, character. Tick is going to be critical to that person being successful as the next governor of the state. Now, here's what I know for sure. We have a ton of issues that need to be addressed in Michigan. But if you were strong enough to watch the State of the Union the other night, you saw a president with a list of 23 different things that he said he was going to work on in a single year. Not possible. So in embarking on this effort, I wanted to identify 4 things that were going to be critical to moving Michigan forward. So for me, the first 4 things that we got to focus on are restoring a quality pre-K through 12 education to every child in the state. The second issue is making sure that we build an infrastructure model that allows us to have good roads, water and sewage for every single community in the state, because it is no mistake that Flint happened. And the one thing that we should all know is that Flint was just the canary in the coal mine. It was an indicator. And if we don't address those infrastructure issues immediately, we'll be living the same way we lived 100 years ago. And I don't think anybody in this room is prepared for that. Third thing is we have fundamentally got to make a commitment to change our tax policy in this state. So I've said that we need to go from a fixed tax rate of 4.25% to a progressive state income tax that has a top rate on it of 10%. And in addition to that, we've got to make sure that our corporate citizens are paying their fair share. You know, we got a corporate tax rate in the state today of 6%. But if you can find 5 corporations that actually pay 6%, I'll take you and your family to dinner, anywhere you want to go. So we got to make this fair. We got to make sure that we have the resources that we need to get things done. You know, we hear a lot of talk about providing free education to our young folks in the state. Free college, that we're going to do that. Well, you can't do it if you can't pay for it. And right now, anybody that promises you that they're going to be able to provide free college for students in this state is not telling you the truth. So integrity matters. Now, one of the collateral benefits we'll get from the infrastructure program, the tax policy that I've talked about, is we will raise enough incremental revenue to begin to pay for those things. So I'm not going to come back to you and ask you for more money. But I need your support, and I need for you to join hands with me in helping to move Michigan forward.
Thank you very much.
First of all, I want to thank the organizers of an incredible forum. I want to thank my fellow candidates for coming out and having a vigorous conversation. If you've been watching the campaign, you probably know it was a bit of a rough week for us. And you know, I remember when I told my mom that I was going to do this. My mom knows me better than anybody else, and my mom, she's a warrior. She said, you know, Abdurrahman, you've never backed down. You don't back down. And I worry about what they're going to say and do about you. And I said, you know, Mama, this is the time where we need people who are not going to back down. And you know what? At the end of the day, I've had the privilege of talking to people whose lives have been fundamentally handicapped because of the circumstances in which they live. I think about a young woman who works 2 jobs just to be able to afford the rent in her home. I'm never going to stop talking about why she deserves $15 an hour. I think about that elderly couple who pays 40% of their take-home from money that they've had handicapped by the state in the first place when they had their pensions robbed. I'm never going to stop advocating for a single-payer system that allows them to bargain for the pharmaceuticals that they need to live a good life. I think about people who live up in the UP, whose livelihoods depend on a clean Great Lakes. I'm never going to stop saying that we need to shut down Line 5 immediately. And I think about people like you, people who've had their right to self-determination threatened by a system of government that has been far too interested in what corporate overlords want, rather than the kinds of things that are going to improve our lives. I am never going to stop advocating for you. So at this point right now, this question of ours, do we have, you're right, a leader with the integrity to stand up on a set of issues, to deny being a part of a system that has broken and bent people in ways that are unfair fundamentally as a function of what they deserve in the richest, most powerful country in the world? We deserve leaders with integrity. We deserve leaders who are going to stand up and speak truth to power. And you know, my mom called me this week and she said, I told you. And I said, you know, Mama, I told you. And this is the opportunity that we have right now. Thank you very much.
I think the Republicans have taken this state too far to the right. We have problems that need solutions. This is a time for us to have a strong leader, a leader who can come in, propose big ideas, propose good solutions, not be beholden to corporations and special interests, but focused on solving people's problems. When I was in Bay City, I met a young woman. Her name is Tammy. Tammy used to work for a manufacturing company, and that company decided to go all automation. And as they did all automation, she lost her job. She had no other skills. Now she works at a Taco Bell, earning $8.50, taking care of 2 little children and taking care of their health care and their education, and this is no way to live. 20% of Michiganders live under poverty. 40% of African American kids live under poverty. We need a problem solver for Michigan. Time to make speeches is over. We need action. Our party needs to nominate somebody that can beat Mr. Bill Schuette. Now, Mr. BS, for short, I only got given a little bit of time. You know, Mr. BS came from privilege. You know, I came from poverty, so I understand that. He came from the Dow Corning or Dow Chemical money. You know, he will take this state to the right. I will bring progressive ideas to this state. And Democrats have always taken the high road. And the Republicans come, they say Republicans never win elections. We just find ways to lose them. We need to have someone strong who can beat Bill Schuette. That means we cannot have another career politician like him. We cannot have another candidate that's beholden to the corporations. And we cannot have another politician that have gotten us into this status quo. We need to think out of the box. I don't believe that there is a blue wave that's going to put any Democrat in the governor's office. It's not going to happen. We need to stand and say who we are, what a difference we are going to make in the ordinary people's lives. So think carefully. We still have 6 more months. We should have a spirited dialogue like we had today, and let's put the best candidate that can beat Bill Schuette and take this state to the next level.
This is like also a song.